The rain had been falling since late afternoon, a steady curtain of silver that softened the lights along Route 65 and turned the parking lot of Oak Ridge Diner into a mirror of trembling reflections. Nights like this often carried a quiet kind of sorrow through Springfield, Missouri, the kind that settled into the bones of anyone still awake after most of the town had gone to sleep. Daniel Brooks wiped down the final booth of his shift, his cloth moving in slow circles as he listened to the wind brushing against the windows. The neon sign outside flickered gently, casting pale waves of color across the checkered floor. He had worked this late hour for 5 years. The rhythm of it had become familiar, almost comforting in its repetition. Yet on this particular night, something felt strange, as though the air itself held a secret waiting for the right moment to speak. Daniel sensed it before he understood it, the way people sometimes feel the first tremor before a storm breaks open. Near the far corner of the diner sat a woman who did not belong to this world of chipped mugs and old jukebox songs. She wore a black suit that seemed untouched by the dampness outside, and her posture carried the sort of quiet authority found only in people accustomed to making decisions that shape the lives of many. She had arrived more than an hour earlier, ordered a single cup of coffee and a slice of peach pie, then remained seated without touching either. Her gaze moved occasionally toward the window, as if she was measuring the darkness with her own thoughts. Daniel refilled the salt shakers, wiped the counter, and checked on the regular customers before glancing her way again. She had not moved, not even when a gust of wind rattled the glass. Something about her presence stirred a faint uneasiness inside him. It was not fear, only the uneasy awareness that she carried a purpose far beyond a late-night meal. He approached her table with a coffee pot in hand, offering a gentle smile that he always tried to give even when he was exhausted. "Would you like a warm refill, Mom?" he asked softly, careful not to startle her. She lifted her eyes toward him, dark and steady, observing him with a calm intelligence that made him feel unexpectedly seen. For a moment, Daniel wondered if she had come here waiting for someone. But then she gave a simple nod and allowed him to pour without saying another word. He stepped away quietly, yet the encounter lingered in his mind. The diner was nearly empty now. Raymond Carter, the old truck driver who spent more time at the counter than on the road these days, had just left after telling Daniel another long story about snowstorms in the Dakotas. Linda, the owner, was finishing paperwork in the back office. The hum of the refrigerator and the soft murmur of rain were the only sounds remaining. When the woman finally rose, Daniel watched her walk toward the register with graceful steps. Her credit card glinted beneath the lights as she handed it over. He processed the payment, handed her the receipt, and expected the usual polite farewell. Instead, she simply nodded once and stepped out into the night, her heels tapping softly against the wet pavement until the rain swallowed her silhouette. Daniel looked down at the receipt and felt the familiar pinch in his gut. No tip. Not a single dollar. People like her rarely tipped well, but for some reason the emptiness of the line tonight stung more sharply. Perhaps the fatigue made him sensitive. Perhaps her cold distance had unsettled him. He shook his head, folded the receipt, and returned to clean her booth. The plate was empty, the pie untouched. The cup of coffee had grown cold. He reached for the dishes, but something beneath the rim caught his eye. A white envelope folded once, with deliberate care, rested just out of sight. On its surface, written in elegant handwriting, were the words for the waiter who remembers names. Daniel froze. He had no idea why his chest tightened or why the world seemed to pause for a quiet breath. He reached for the envelope with cautious fingers, as if it might vanish if he moved too quickly. It was light, almost weightless. Yet in his heart he felt at once that whatever it held inside carried something far heavier than any tip he had ever received. Something about this night was going to change everything. Daniel stood for a long moment with the envelope in his hand, feeling the strange weight of it settle into his thoughts. The rain struck harder against the windows, as if urging him to hurry home. He slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket and finished closing the diner, locking the front door, before stepping out into the cool December air. The parking lot shimmered with reflections of passing headlights, and the scent of wet pavement carried a quiet sadness he had grown familiar with. The drive to his apartment took only 10 minutes, yet tonight it felt longer. Each red light gave his mind room to drift back over the last 5 years, tracing the winding path that had brought him here. Before life shifted abruptly, he had been a software developer at a small firm downtown. The job paid well, the benefits were steady, and he once believed he knew exactly how the future would unfold. Grace, his wife, used to tease him about his careful planning. She would say that life had its own ideas, and sometimes you had to let it surprise you. Her words had proven truer than he ever wished. Grace died in a car accident on a warm afternoon in October of 2017. Daniel remembered the softness of the sun through the kitchen window, the smell of toast burning because he had forgotten it in the oven, the moment when his phone rang and the world changed with a single sentence from a stranger. Hannah was only 2 at the time, too small to understand why the house felt quiet or why her father sat beside her crib night after night afraid to sleep alone. In the months that followed, Daniel tried to remain at his job, but every morning felt heavier. Deadlines and office chatter felt distant, like echoes from a world he no longer belonged to. Childcare costs rose, exhaustion dug deep into his bones, and he realized he could not keep moving in the same direction. The only hours Hannah truly needed him were daytime hours, when little children asked for stories, snacks, and safe arms to nap in. So he left the salary, the comfortable office, and the future that once made sense. Oak Ridge Diner became the place that allowed him to be present for the moments that mattered most. The pay was modest, and the uniform sleeves grew thin no matter how often he mended them. Yet serving coffee through the night, greeting travelers who drifted along Route 65, and offering small kindnesses became a strange kind of calling. He remembered nearly every name that passed through the diner doors, partly because it was natural to him, partly because he knew how it felt to be unseen. When he finally reached the apartment complex, the lights in most units were already dark. Martha Henderson, the elderly neighbor who watched Hannah during his shifts, had left the hallway lamp on as always. Daniel stepped quietly inside his home and paused to listen. The soft hum of the heater filled the small space, and a nightlight glowed gently from Hannah's room. He opened her door and found her curled beneath a faded quilt, clutching her stuffed rabbit close to her chest. Her breath rose and fell with a rhythm that soothed the ache in his heart. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, remembering how Grace used to do the same. For a moment he forgot the envelope. Then the thought returned sharply, and he slipped it from his pocket. The paper felt crisp and expensive, unlike anything usually found in a diner. He held it near the kitchen lamp, hesitating before opening it. Something deep inside whispered caution, yet another part of him whispered hope, the kind he rarely allowed himself to feel. He opened the envelope slowly, his pulse steady but firm, sensing that whatever message waited within would shape tomorrow in a way he could not yet understand. The note inside the envelope stayed unopened on the small kitchen table, while Daniel warmed his hands around a mug of coffee. Dawn was still far away, and the apartment held the soft quiet of early morning. He wanted to read the message, yet part of him hesitated, as though words on elegant paper might lift him into a world he was not prepared to face. Before opening it, he allowed his thoughts to wander back to the people who filled his nights at the diner, the familiar faces that wove threads of simple grace into his long shifts. Oak Ridge Diner sat on the edge of Springfield, where travelers often stopped for a warm meal and locals found comfort in routine. The place had worn booths, squeaky stools, and a jukebox filled with old country songs that nobody bothered to update. Yet despite its faded corners, the diner held a certain warmth, built from years of shared stories and quiet kindnesses that moved from table to table like a steady heartbeat. One of the regulars, Raymond Carter, had been stopping by long before Daniel arrived. Raymond was a trucker with a weathered face and a laugh that rose from deep inside his chest. He carried tales of long drives through snowy plains and desolate highways, stories he told with such gusto that they became part of the diner's nightly atmosphere. Daniel listened with patience, nodding at the right moments even when he had already heard each tale more than once. Listening was something he offered freely, understanding how valuable it was for an old trucker to feel heard. Then there was Jenna Morales, a slender young woman who came in with textbooks stacked under her arms. She studied nursing at the community college and often stayed late, exhausted and stretched thin by tuition fees and double shifts at a grocery store. Daniel noticed how she counted her coins with embarrassed fingers, trying to order only what she could afford. Many nights he quietly adjusted the bills, scribbling a smaller total before she could protest. When she looked up with grateful eyes, he simply said, "Pay it forward someday," and moved on to the next table. Tom Wheeler, the BP Chiang in the kitchen, was a man with graying hair and hands rough from decades at the grill. He rarely spoke about himself, but Daniel had learned bits and pieces over the years. Tom had once dreamed of opening his own small restaurant, but life pulled him in other directions. Daniel often sensed in him a longing that flickered beneath his gruff exterior. Yet Tom carried on with steady loyalty, flipping pancakes and frying eggs with the precision of someone who had long accepted the shape of his life. The diner was full of stories like these. People trying, struggling, hoping. Daniel felt connected to them in a way he had not expected when he first put on the apron. Each night reminded him that the world was larger than his own grief, and that small acts of care could brighten even the tiredest soul. Perhaps that was why the stranger in the black suit had unsettled him. She had watched Daniel move from table to table with a gaze that did not match the usual crowd. It was observant, almost searching, as though she came with a purpose far heavier than pie and coffee. He returned his attention to the envelope lying there on the table, as if waiting for him to catch up with fate. Daniel breathed deeply and allowed the memories of the night to flow through him. Everything about the woman had felt deliberate, from the untouched dessert to the straight lines of her posture. She had observed the way he handled Raymond when the old trucker grew too loud, the gentle way he guided Jenna without making her feel ashamed, the patience in his voice even when exhaustion pressed on his chest. Daniel reached for the envelope again, his fingers steady now. Whatever message it carried, he sensed it would be tied to the quiet acts he performed without expecting anything in return. He thought about the kind of man he had become through these long nights, shaped not by a salary or title, but by small moments of humanity. With steady breath and a heart caught between apprehension and hope, Daniel lifted the note, ready to finally learn what the stranger had left behind. The note unfolded softly between Daniel's fingers, its paper smooth and thick, unlike anything that usually crossed his path. The handwriting inside was graceful, each letter formed with careful strokes that suggested confidence rather than haste. He read the message twice to make sure he understood every word. It invited him to visit Harrison and Company. Innovations at 10 the next morning instructed him to ask for someone named Evelyn Harrison, and ended with a short line that felt both mysterious and unsettling. "This is not charity. This is a proposal." Daniel leaned back in his chair, the kitchen light casting warm shadows across the walls. A proposal from a stranger made no sense. His life had been a routine of early mornings, hurried breakfasts with Hannah, and late nights filled with coffee pots and weary travelers. Nothing about his world seemed connected to the polished presence of the woman from the diner. He tried to imagine why someone so clearly successful would seek him out, but no answer surfaced. He folded the note and tucked it back into the envelope, unsure what to make of the invitation. Doubt filled his thoughts, carrying the memories of past disappointments. He had risen before the sun each day since Grace passed, doing his best to be both mother and father to a growing child. Life had not offered surprises lately, and certainly not the kind that carried signatures from executives in tall glass buildings. Daniel washed the coffee mug, wiped the table, and walked quietly toward Hannah's room. The sound of her soft breathing reached him before he opened the door. She lay curled in her favorite blanket, her small face relaxed in a way that always eased his heart. He knelt beside her, letting the warmth of her presence guide him back to steadier thoughts. He had built his life around her needs, making decisions that gave her safety and stability. Any step into uncertainty required caution. The alarm clock on the counter read 5:40 in the morning. He considered the invitation again. If the note was some kind of scam, he would discover it quickly. If it was genuine, he owed it to Hannah to at least hear the woman out. The tuition letter from her school still sat on the fridge, its sharp increase in fees creating a weight heavier than any envelope. He could not ignore the reality that their finances were stretched thinner each month. The morning passed slowly as he prepared Hannah for school. Her cheerful chatter as she ate cereal brought a small smile to his tired face. After dropping her off, he returned home to shower and change into the only suit he owned, a navy blue set, kept neatly pressed in the back of the closet. He had worn it to Grace's funeral and not many times since. The fabric felt tighter than he remembered, but it was tidy and that was enough. When he stepped outside, the sky had brightened. Clouds still hung low over Springfield, yet the rain had eased into a light mist that softened the cold air. The streets glistened softly and the city seemed to breathe more gently now that the storm had passed. Daniel drove toward the center of town, nervously gripping the wheel as the tall buildings rose ahead of him. Harrison and Company. Innovations towered above the others, a structure of glass and steel that caught the morning light in a dazzling reflection. He parked across the street and sat for a moment, letting his pulse settle. He felt out of place, like a man stepping into a story he did not belong in, carrying worries that belonged to another world. Finally, he exhaled deeply and stepped out of the car. The air smelled clean-washed by the long night of rain. Daniel straightened his jacket, glanced once more at the imposing building, and crossed the street with a determination shaped by years of caring for a daughter who depended on him. Whatever waited inside, he would face it. Not because he believed in miracles, but because he owed it to Hannah to at least try. Tras su tercer torneo en 2015, Arai regres de Tailandia esperando elogios. Lo que encontró fue un cambio de atmósfera algo siniestro en el air, not que oficiales de alto rango interrogaban a sus amigos, a su familia, a sus maestros. No eran entrevistas para un documental, eran verificaciones de antecedentes. En Corea del Norte, cuando el Estado se interesa tanto por ti, solo significa una cosa: has sido elegido. Los rumores susurrados con miedo confirmaron sus sospechas. El gobierno planeaba reclutarlo inmediatamente después de la secundaria. No a la universidad. En el mayor de los casos, sí. Hay un hacker para la Oficina General de Reconocimiento robando criptomonedas para financiar bombas. En el peor, terminar en un laboratorio de arma nuclear. Será una calcule carne huso enterrado para traer muerte sin ilequien. Sin salida, su vida privada había terminado. Su servidumbre acababa de comenzar. Vigilancia eterna. Aislamiento eterno. Daniel left the tall glass building with the folder still pressed tightly to his chest, the weight of it heavier than any tray he had carried through long nights at the diner. The cold air met him as he stepped onto the sidewalk, carrying the faint scent of wet concrete left over from the storm. He paused near the curb, trying to gather his thoughts. The offer from Evelyn was more than generous, and the opportunity she described sounded meaningful, yet something inside him trembled with caution. He did not know if he could trust a world so far removed from his own. By the time he reached home, the folder remained unopened in the passenger seat. He planned to spend the afternoon thinking, maybe even writing down questions to ask before giving an answer. That plan, however, dissolved quickly when his phone buzzed with a message from Linda at the diner. Her words came through hurriedly as though she had typed them in a rush. You might want to see the news. People are talking. Daniel frowned, unsure what she meant. When he searched the local website, a headline appeared immediately on the screen. Wealthy executive selects small-town waiter for high-paying role. Why him? Beneath the title, an article filled with speculation painted him as a curious story for readers to debate. Photos of Evelyn walking into the diner accompanied the piece, along with questions about their connection. Some comments suggested favoritism, others hinted at motives he did not understand. His stomach tightened as he read. The writer described him as a mysterious pick-a-man with no clear qualifications, someone who had caught the interest of a powerful woman. The tone was not outright cruel, yet it carried enough implication to stir unease. He felt exposed, misunderstood, and suddenly small beneath the bright scrutiny of strangers. Before Daniel could process the shock, his phone rang again. This time, it was Hannah's teacher, Allison Grant. She spoke gently, but her voice carried concern. "Daniel, I wanted to let you know something before Hannah comes home." Some parents saw the article. Their children repeated parts of it at recess. It caused confusion. Hannah became upset. He closed his eyes and leaned against the counter, steadying his breath, as Allison described how a few children teased Hannah, asking why her father was involved with a woman from a tall building downtown. The little girl had not understood the words, but she had understood the tone. She had cried quietly until the teacher pulled her aside and comforted her with soft reassurance. When Daniel finally hung up, a wave of helplessness washed over him. He had spent years protecting Hannah from the heavy shadows that life sometimes cast, yet now, because of a single visit to a corporate office, she had been pulled into a storm she never asked for. He pictured her small face streaked with tears, her hands clutching the straps of her backpack as she tried to make sense of something unfair. He sat at the kitchen table and bowed his head, letting the worry settle through him slowly. The job offer had seemed promising only hours earlier, a rare opportunity that could lift the strain he lived with every day. Yet now it felt like a doorway leading into a world where stories twisted easily and strangers carried opinions sharper than he ever expected. He feared stepping into that world might bring more harm to his daughter than good. Later that afternoon, when Hannah came home, she walked through the door with tired eyes. Daniel knelt and gathered her in his arms, holding her longer than he usually did. She buried her face in his shoulder, quiet and confused. He wanted to tell her everything would be all right, though part of him wondered how he could promise that when the choice before him had already stirred such pain. As he stroked her hair, he realized the decision ahead carried far more weight than salary or benefits. It touched the heart of his responsibility as a father. If taking the job meant exposing Hannah to constant whispers and harsh judgments, he could not accept it. The world had been unkind enough to her already. That night, as rain returned lightly against the windows, Daniel sat alone at the table, the folder beside him. The excitement he had once felt had dimmed beneath the difficult truth. He was a father first. Everything else came second. And for the first time since receiving the offer, he began to think that perhaps he should walk away. Daniel hardly slept that night. He lay awake listening to the soft patter of rain as it brushed against the small apartment windows. Every sound in the quiet darkness reminded him of Hannah's trembling voice and the confusion in her eyes when she tried to understand why other children had treated her unkindly. He thought of the article, the careless words written by someone who knew nothing about their lives. And through all of it, the folder from Harrison and Company remained untouched on the table, waiting for a decision he no longer felt certain he could make. Morning arrived with a dull gray sky. Daniel moved slowly through the kitchen, preparing breakfast with mechanical motions. Hannah sat at the small table, tapping her spoon gently against her bowl. Her usual bright chatter was replaced by silence. Daniel felt a deep ache settle in his chest. He brushed her hair gently and told her that everything would be all right, though the reassurance tasted fragile as it left his lips. After dropping her at school, he drove home, changed into his diner uniform, and prepared for another shift. He hoped the familiar rhythm of work might clear his thoughts. Yet when he stepped through the diner's back door, the uneasy whispers began almost at once. Tom looked up from the grill with a concerned expression. Jenna, stopping by for a quick breakfast before class, gave him a sympathetic smile. And Linda, usually calm and measured, approached him with a gentle touch on his arm. She mentioned quietly that people in town had been talking, some curious, others suspicious, none aware of what actually happened. Daniel forced himself to work through the motions. He carried plates, refilled cups, and listened to conversations that floated around him like drifting clouds. The weight of attention felt heavier than he expected. He never sought the spotlight, never asked for anything more than a steady job and enough income to give Hannah a secure home. Yet now, strangers discussed him as if he were a riddle they wanted to solve. By late afternoon, the pressure had settled into his bones. When he returned home to pick up Hannah from Mrs. Henderson next door, his thoughts were already forming a decision he believed would protect his daughter. He would turn down the offer. He would call Evelyn, thank her for the opportunity, and step back into the quiet life he understood. Hannah deserved peace, more than anything money could buy. He reached for his phone with a steady yet heavy hand. When he called the number on the card, Evelyn answered almost immediately. Her voice sounded calm, but beneath it lay a softness he had not noticed before. Daniel told her he could not accept the job, explained that the article had caused trouble for his daughter, and that he could not allow her to suffer because of a choice he made. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line, a silence filled with unspoken thoughts. Then Evelyn spoke quietly, telling him she understood. Her tone carried no frustration, only a sadness that seemed older than the moment itself. She told him she respected his love for his daughter, that she admired it, and that she would not try to persuade him further. Daniel felt the calm in her voice settle around him, yet the ache in his chest did not ease. He hung up with a heavy heart, believing the matter was closed. The next morning, a knock sounded at the door as he prepared Hannah's breakfast. He expected Mrs. Henderson, or perhaps one of the neighbors. Instead, when he opened the door, he found Evelyn standing in the hallway of his modest apartment building. Her presence was so unexpected that for a moment he could only stare. She held a simple bag at her side, her expression composed yet gently concerned. She asked softly if she could come in. Daniel stepped aside, unsure of what brought her here, and watched as she entered the small living room with the same level of respect as if she had been stepping into a grand home. Hannah looked up from the table, surprised to see the elegant woman from the article standing before her. And then, in a gesture Daniel could never have predicted, Evelyn knelt beside his daughter and placed a brightly illustrated science book on the table. She told Hannah she had heard she liked learning about the world and hoped the book would make her smile. In that moment, the air in the room softened. The weight of the article, the gossip, the worry seemed to pause as Hannah traced the colorful cover with careful fingers. Daniel watched them quietly, realizing that the woman before him was far more than the figure painted by the headlines. She had come not to persuade, but to show something simple and sincere. Kindness, when it was real, needed no announcement. For a long moment, Daniel simply watched as Hannah held the science book with both hands, her eyes following the bright illustrations as though she feared they might vanish if she blinked. Evelyn remained kneeling beside her, speaking with a gentleness that felt entirely different from the polished professionalism he had witnessed in her office. She spoke softly about how learning could open doors, how curiosity was a gift that could guide a person through difficult seasons. Hannah listened with shy fascination, her earlier sadness replaced by a tentative spark of joy. Daniel felt something shift inside him, a quiet loosening of the knot that had tightened in his chest since the article appeared. He had expected Evelyn to come with explanations or arguments, maybe even an attempt to persuade him to reconsider her offer. Instead, she spoke to his daughter with the sincerity of someone who understood what it meant to be shaped by hardship. When Hannah stepped over to the couch to read the first pages of the book, Evelyn rose and faced Daniel. The apartment looked small around her, yet she seemed perfectly comfortable within its modest walls. She glanced toward the child, then back at him with a thoughtful expression. "I want to say something without asking you to change your mind," she began. "Yesterday was difficult for your daughter. I saw it the moment she looked up from the table. No child should feel embarrassed about something she cannot understand, and no parent should have to watch that pain unfold." Daniel nodded slowly, grateful that she acknowledged the truth without trying to soften it. Evelyn continued in a quieter tone. "I know what it feels like to grow up in a home people judge from the outside. My mother waited tables for 20 years. Her uniform was worn thin, and some customers looked through her as if she were not worth a greeting. Yet, she held her dignity close. She raised me with the belief that kindness mattered more than success. She paused, her gaze warming. When I saw you at the diner, I recognized the same spirit I grew up watching. You helped people without expecting anything back. You respected them. My mother always said the world needed more people like that. Daniel breathed slowly, letting her words settle through him like steady rain calming dry earth. He had never imagined that the woman who seemed so far above his world shared a past that echoed parts of his own. The heaviness inside him shifted again, though caution still lingered. Evelyn looked toward Hannah once more before stepping closer. I am not here to ask you to reconsider. I came because I wanted your daughter to know the truth. Nothing in that article reflects the man you are. She deserves to hear that from someone besides you. Her sincerity touched Daniel in a place he kept guarded. For years he had carried the weight of doing everything alone. His decisions, his sacrifices, his regrets, all of it rested on his shoulders. Hearing another adult speak with such certainty about his worth felt almost foreign. He cleared his throat, unsure how to respond. Thank you, he said quietly. You did not have to come here. I felt that I did, she replied. Silence settled around them, but it was not uncomfortable. The morning light slipped through the curtains, touching the edges of the room with a gentle glow. Hannah giggled softly at something inside the book, and the sound carried through the apartment like a small blessing. Eventually, Evelyn stepped toward the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. You do not owe me anything, Daniel. But I want you to remember something. Opportunities appear in strange ways, often when we least expect them. Do not let fear decide for you. Let purpose guide you instead. She gave him a small nod and left quietly, her footsteps fading down the hall. Daniel closed the door and leaned against it, taking in a long, steady breath. The apartment felt different now, filled with the gentle echo of words he had not realized he needed to hear. Hannah looked up from the couch with a bright smile. Daddy, she said, I like her. Daniel smiled softly. He liked her too, though not in the way the article suggested. He liked the honesty in her voice, the truth beneath her composure, and the unexpected compassion she carried with her. And for the first time since the offer arrived, he felt something new stirring within him. Possibility. 2 weeks later, Daniel stood in front of the tall glass doors of Harrison and Company. Innovations once again. This time he was not a visitor. He was an employee beginning his first day. The early morning sun touched the windows with faint gold, and the city hummed with the rise of a new workday. Daniel straightened his slightly worn suit jacket, took a slow breath, and stepped into a world he had never imagined for himself. Inside the lobby, he felt the quiet rush of people moving with confidence, their polished shoes tapping across the marble floor. He held his employee badge awkwardly in his hand, aware that the navy suit he wore still carried the faint scent of the diner, the scent of coffee and long nights. It was not something he was ashamed of, but it marked him as different, and he knew the difference would not go unnoticed. On the 32nd floor, Mark greeted him politely and guided him toward a small office near the corner, a simple space with clean lines and a modest desk. It was not glamorous, but it felt steady, and Daniel appreciated that. He set his belongings down gently, not wanting to look out of place. Mark gave him a brief rundown of morning tasks, then left him alone to read through program files. It did not take long for Daniel to sense the quiet eyes of others drifting toward him. As he stepped into the hallway to find the copy machine, 2 employees passed him with barely concealed curiosity. A third whispered something under her breath before they turned the corner. Daniel pretended not to notice, but the weight of their scrutiny pressed against him. He understood their thoughts. Why had someone from a diner been chosen for this role? What secret lay behind Evelyn's decision? Was he a charity case or something else entirely? Daniel kept walking. He spent the morning reading through documents, reviewing plans, and absorbing the mission of the Second Path Initiative. The program aimed to support single parents through job training, childcare assistance, and personalized guidance. It was a meaningful mission, one he believed in deeply. Yet believing in it did not quiet the nervousness that pulsed in his chest as he stepped into the first staff meeting. The conference room was full of polished shoes, pressed suits, and sharp voices. Evelyn was present, seated at the head of the table. When Daniel entered the room, quieted. She gave him a small nod, calm and steady, but she did not speak on his behalf. She allowed the moment to unfold naturally. Daniel introduced himself, simply explaining that he had lived through many of the hardships the program sought to address. He shared his belief that people deserve dignity, not pity. His voice did not shake, though his hands felt cold. As he finished, the room remained quiet, before a few polite nods broke the stillness. Some faces softened, others remained guarded. Throughout the next several days, he felt the contrast between polite acceptance and quiet hesitation. He arrived early, learning the systems one careful step at a time. He stayed late reading files until his eyes grew tired. He brought coffee to coworkers and asked questions without shame. He did not try to be perfect. He only tried to be sincere. Slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. When he spoke with clients seeking help, his voice carried an authenticity others lacked. He did not simply offer guidance. He understood the fatigue of sitting at a kitchen table late at night wondering how to stretch a paycheck. He knew the uncertainty of raising a child alone. These truths lived inside him, and people sensed it. One afternoon, as he walked back to his office, he overheard a conversation between two employees. They were not whispering this time. One of them spoke in a thoughtful tone, saying they had never heard a new staff member handle a difficult call with such calm understanding. The other agreed softly. It was the first sign that he was no longer viewed as an outsider. When Daniel returned to his office, he paused by the window, letting the warm afternoon sunlight rest on his shoulders. He thought of Hannah, of Evelyn's quiet faith in him, and of the many families waiting for a chance to rebuild their lives. For the first time since stepping into this building, he felt something close to belonging. As the weeks passed, Daniel settled into a steady rhythm within his new role, learning each process with careful attention. The Second Path initiative began accepting applications, and soon the office was filled with stories from people who carried struggles he understood deeply. Every file held a life shaped by hardship. Every voice on the other end of a call carried a blend of hope and quiet fear. Daniel listened to them all with patience, remembering how long he had walked the same uncertain path. One chilly afternoon, while reviewing a stack of intake forms, Mark stepped into Daniel's office holding a file with a clipped expression. "This one came through earlier than expected," he said. "Thought you should see it." He set the papers on the desk before returning to the hallway without another word. Daniel opened the file and felt his breath catch. The name on the first page read Connor Hayes. He recognized it instantly. Connor often stopped by Oak Ridge Diner after late shifts at a nearby auto garage, his clothes stained with grease and dust, his eyes carrying the heavy look of someone far too young to bear such responsibility. Daniel had served him coffee many times. The young man rarely ordered food, always calculating prices carefully before choosing the cheapest option. As Daniel read further, the story unfolded with a familiar ache. Connor worked 3 jobs to support his younger brother after their mother fell ill. School fees, rent, and groceries had become a mountain he climbed every month. Despite his exhaustion, he dreamed of becoming a certified mechanic, something that would offer a stable future. Yet he lacked the time and money to pursue proper training. Daniel closed the file gently, feeling the truth settle inside him. This program was built for people like Connor, people who fought each day without complaint. He stood, walked to Evelyn's office, and knocked softly. When she invited him in, he explained the situation with quiet urgency. Evelyn listened closely, her eyes steady. "Do you believe this young man is ready for the program?" she asked. "I do," Daniel said firmly. "He is hardworking, responsible, and determined. He only needs a door to open." "Then let us open one for him," she replied. Within 2 days, the program arranged for Connor to enroll in evening classes at a local technical institute. Tuition was covered, transportation, Assistance was provided, and Daniel met with him personally to make sure he understood each step. When he told Connor the news, the young man stared at him in stunned silence before lowering his head with trembling gratitude. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, reminding him that this opportunity was earned, not given freely. Not long after Connor's acceptance, another story crossed Daniel's desk. A single mother named Rachel struggled to provide for her 2 children while working overnight stocking shelves at a grocery store. Her income barely covered rent, and childcare costs weighed heavily on her limited budget. She dreamed of finding steadier employment, something that offered daytime hours and a chance to be present for her children. Daniel reviewed her information with quiet focus. The tired handwriting on her application reminded him of countless nights filling out forms after Hannah fell asleep. He scheduled a meeting with her, and when she arrived, he greeted her with the warm steadiness he used to offer customers at the diner. She shared her worries, carefully, embarrassed by her situation, yet Daniel listened without judgment, offering gentle encouragement. By the end of the week, Rachel was enrolled in a medical billing course. The program connected her with a hospital for future placement and arranged childcare support so she could attend classes without fear. When she received the news, tears filled her eyes, but Daniel reassured her softly that this was the beginning of something better. Each story, each person brought the mission of the initiative to life. Daniel felt the purpose of his work grow stronger as he witnessed real change take shape. He carried these moments with him like quiet lanterns lighting the path forward. One evening, while gathering his notes, he paused by the window and looked down at the city stretching outward beneath the warm glow of streetlights. He thought of Connor, of Rachel, of those who waited for second chances they never thought would come. And he felt something he had not felt in a long time: hope. Springfield had begun to transition from winter into the early stirrings of spring, when the quiet rhythm of Daniel's new life was suddenly interrupted. The air softened, the days grew longer, and the city carried a sense of steady renewal. Yet inside the tall glass building of Harrison and Company, innovation's tension gathered like a hidden storm cloud. It began on a Wednesday morning. Daniel arrived early, as he always did, hoping to complete several calls before the office filled with chatter. He set his coffee down, organized his notes, and prepared to start his day. Just as he reached for the phone, a sharp sound echoed down the hallway. Papers rustled. Voices rose abruptly. Chairs scraped against the floor. Mark rushed past Daniel's door with a pale, shaken face. Daniel stepped out quickly, sensing trouble before he heard the words. Near the corner office, 2 employees stood frozen, their expressions wide with fear. Then he saw Evelyn lying on the carpet, her body still, one hand resting near a stack of scattered documents. Daniel felt his heart clench. He hurried forward, kneeling beside her. She was breathing, but her breaths were faint and uneven. Her forehead glistened with a sheen of exhaustion, and her normally composed features looked drawn and weary. "Call an ambulance," Daniel said firmly, though his voice trembled slightly. Someone sprinted toward the elevator while another placed a jacket beneath her head. Daniel stayed beside her until paramedics arrived, speaking softly to reassure her, even though she did not respond. He had seen tired people before, but this was different. This was the breaking point of someone who had carried too much for far too long. Later that day, the staff learned she had collapsed from exhaustion. Doctors insisted she needed rest after months of working 90-hour weeks while managing both the company and several large philanthropic projects. She would remain in the hospital overnight for observation. The building felt heavier without her presence. Even the hallways seemed quieter, as if the place held its breath. Daniel visited briefly after work. Evelyn rested peacefully, though her strength had clearly faded. She offered him a faint smile when she saw him, but spoke very little. He did not stay long, not wanting to disturb her. As he walked out of the hospital, he worried about what might happen if she needed more time to recover. His answer arrived the next morning, though it was not the one he hoped for. When he entered the office, Mark approached with a tight expression. "The board is having an emergency meeting. You should know they want to review the budget for the Second Path initiative." Daniel nodded slowly, sensing the meaning hidden behind Mark's careful tone. They want to cut it, don't they? Mark hesitated before answering. They think it is too risky without Evelyn present. Too much spending. Too many unknowns. Daniel felt a slow, steady anger rise within him. The program had just begun to show results. Connor was attending classes he once believed were out of reach. Rachel had taken her first test in the medical billing course. Another family had started receiving childcare support. Lives were shifting inch by inch towards stability. He could not accept the idea of taking that away simply because Evelyn was recovering. Throughout the morning, whispers drifted through the hallways. Some employees seemed resigned. Others looked uneasy, unsure where loyalty should rest. Without Evelyn's strong leadership, the board felt emboldened to question everything she had built. When Daniel learned the meeting was held behind closed doors, he felt the weight of it like a door being shut in front of his face. He stood at his desk, staring at the papers that represented dozens of people counting on the program. The thought of turning away from them tightened his chest. For years he had lived on the receiving end of small mercies. Now he stood on the giving side, and the responsibility was deeper than he had expected. He knew he could not stay silent. He knew he had to face the board even if they refused to invite him. And so, with steady resolve, Daniel gathered his notes, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the conference room. The storm was waiting, but so was he. Daniel reached the tall double doors of the conference room and paused for a steady breath. Through the frosted glass, he could see silhouettes gathered around a long table, their movements sharp and deliberate. These were people accustomed to making decisions with numbers alone, people who rarely saw the faces behind the statistics they studied. He placed his hand on the cool metal handle, reminded himself of Connor and Rachel, and pushed the door open. The room quieted at once. 12 board members turned toward him, surprise flickering across their expressions. They were dressed in tailored suits, seated beneath soft lights that cast faint reflections on the polished table. An older man with silver hair and firm posture spoke first. His voice carried a tone of authority shaped by years of leading high-level discussions. "Mr. Brooks, this is a closed meeting." Daniel stepped inside without hesitating. "I know," he replied calmly. "I am here anyway." A few members exchanged glances. Mark stood against the far wall, worry shadowing his eyes. Though he gave Daniel a small nod of support, Daniel walked to the center of the room, feeling all eyes press against him. His heart beat hard, but his voice remained steady. "You want to cut the program?" he began. "I understand you have concerns. You see a large budget, many moving parts, and uncertain outcomes. But if you stop the initiative now, you are not saving money. You are abandoning people, and those people matter." A woman near the end of the table leaned forward. "We have reviewed the numbers," she said. "The expenses are considerable." "Numbers do not tell the whole story," Daniel answered softly. "You might look at charts and see risk. I look at those same charts and see lives. Single parents working 2 jobs. Children who have never had a stable home. Families trying to rebuild after years of setbacks. They are not entries on a spreadsheet. They are people with names, histories, and hopes." He paused, letting the room absorb his words. Their expressions shifted, though none spoke yet. Daniel continued. "When I was younger, I believed success only came from education and good planning. But life changed my path. I saw what happened when someone faced hardship without support. For years, I tried to raise my daughter alone on a small wage. I learned what it meant to worry about rent, groceries, medical bills, and tuition. That experience taught me something numbers cannot measure. Dignity. The kind you give people simply by offering real help." Silence settled over the room, no longer cold but thoughtful. "Rachel, one of our first applicants, is taking classes she never dreamed possible. She reads her lessons at night after her children fall asleep. She volunteers on weekends because she wants to help other mothers. That kind of change does not fit neatly into a financial report, yet it matters deeply. He stepped back, placing his hands gently on the table. If you end this initiative now, you are not cutting costs. You are cutting hope. And I will not stand by quietly while that happens. So I'm asking you to let the program continue. Let us build something that lasts. And if you decide to end it, then I cannot remain part of this company. I will walk away. The room fell completely still. Only the soft hum of the ceiling vents filled the silence. The board members looked among themselves, some frowning in thought, others nodding subtly. Daniel did not wait for their reply. He turned, walked out of the room with quiet dignity, and closed the doors behind him. 2 hours later, his phone buzzed. He stepped into the hallway, heart unsteady, and answered. It was Evelyn calling from her hospital room. Her voice was weak, but warm. The board voted to continue funding, she said gently. Unanimously. Daniel leaned against the wall, eyes closing with relief. What did you say to them? She asked softly. The truth, he replied. Her quiet chuckle drifted through the phone. I chose the right person. Daniel slipped the phone into his pocket and breathed in the moment. The storm had passed, yet his work had only begun. The days following the board's decision carried a quiet sense of triumph through the halls of Harrison and Company. Innovations. Employees walked with lighter steps, conversations drifted more freely, and the tension that once lingered in corners seemed to lift like morning fog under sunlight. Daniel arrived each day with renewed purpose, eager to continue the work he believed in so deeply. He felt grateful that the program had survived the storm, but he also knew it needed to grow stronger to withstand future challenges. The Second Path initiative expanded its outreach as spring warmed the city. More families came forward seeking guidance, each carrying stories shaped by long nights, difficult jobs, and sacrifices made silently for the sake of their children. Daniel met with them personally whenever possible, making sure the program offered both practical resources and compassionate understanding. He spent hours on the phone coordinating classes, helping arrange transportation, and speaking with employers willing to offer second chances to those who had long been overlooked. As weeks turned into months, success stories began to bloom. Connor attended his classes consistently and sent Daniel a short message every time he passed an exam. Rachel gained confidence as she neared the end of her training. Another participant, a father named Leonard, secured a part-time job after years of struggling to find steady work. Their progress became steady proof that the initiative mattered. It did not take long for others outside the company to notice. Local newspapers published follow-up articles praising the program's early results. Reporters visited community centers to interview participants, capturing moments of gratitude and relief. A popular radio host invited Daniel for an interview, eager to hear the story behind the initiative's growth. He politely declined, explaining that the focus should remain on the families, not on him. Although the host asked again later, Daniel gently refused a second time. He remembered all too well the discomfort of being misrepresented in the past. He had no interest in returning to that spotlight. His goal was simple: help people quietly and thoroughly without seeking applause. Still, the positive coverage brought new applicants and supporters. Donations increased. Partnerships formed. Even a few skeptical employees began stopping by Daniel's office to offer help, asking if they could volunteer or assist with outreach. Their change in attitude did not go unnoticed. Daniel thanked them warmly, appreciating the shift, not as validation but as hope for a more compassionate culture within the company. Evelyn returned to the office several weeks after her collapse. She moved more slowly, with careful steps that suggested she was still regaining strength. Yet her eyes held steady gratitude when she saw the progress Daniel had made. She visited his office one afternoon, leaning lightly on the doorframe. "You have done far more than I expected in such a short time," she said with a quiet smile. Daniel smiled back, though humbly. The families did the hard part. They just needed a way forward. "Perhaps," she replied, "but someone needed to build the path first." They shared a moment of calm understanding. The work was far from finished, yet its foundation felt solid at last. One morning near the end of June, an article appeared in a major regional paper highlighting the initiative as one of the most promising community programs in the Midwest. It praised the structure, the thoughtful guidance, and the results. Yet Daniel noticed with relief that his name appeared only briefly mentioned simply as the program's director. He liked it that way. When he returned home that evening, Hannah greeted him at the door with a drawing she had made at school. It showed her father standing beside a group of smiling families, all holding papers that appeared to be certificates. She had written in careful letters at the top, "My dad helps people start again." Daniel held the drawing for a long moment, his heart filled with quiet pride. The work he had poured into the program was shaping more lives than he ever imagined, but the reason he continued remained the same. He wanted to give others the same chance at hope that had once felt out of reach for him. Summer settled over Springfield with warm evenings and long afternoons filled with the sound of cicadas. The city felt gentler during this season, as though the sunlight softened old worries and encouraged new beginnings. Daniel continued his work at the initiative, balancing long days at the office with evenings spent at home cooking simple meals and listening to Hannah recount her adventures at school. Life felt steadier, shaped by purpose rather than fear. One Thursday afternoon, while sorting through a stack of program reports, Daniel noticed an envelope among his papers. It was from the private academy Evelyn had mentioned months earlier, the school known for its excellent teachers and advanced curriculum. A scholarship offer lay inside, printed on elegant stationery with thoughtful language, congratulating Hannah on an opportunity few children received. He read the letter twice, then a third time, letting its meaning settle. It would cover every fee from books to meals, promising resources and advantages he had never dreamed of providing. It was the kind of offer that could open doors wide enough for any child to walk confidently toward an exceptional future. Yet something inside Daniel hesitated. That evening after dinner, he sat on the small couch while Hannah played quietly on the rug. The room glowed softly from the table lamp, its familiar warmth embracing them. He looked at her, at the way she hummed while arranging her puzzles, at the gentle contentment she carried in her movements. He thought about her teacher, Allison Grant, who always encouraged her tender spirit. He thought about the children she laughed with during recess, the little stories she brought home each day. He imagined her leaving all that behind. Daniel placed the scholarship letter on the coffee table, drawing a slow breath. Hannah noticed the paper and walked over, sitting beside him with curious eyes. "Daddy, what is that?" she asked gently. "It is a letter from a school," he replied. "They want to offer you a full scholarship. It is a very good school, known for many wonderful things." Her eyes widened. "Would I have to move?" "No," he said softly. "But you would have to leave your school. You would go somewhere new where almost every child comes from wealthy families." Hannah looked down at her hands, thinking quietly. She traced a small circle on the couch cushion, then glanced up. "Would you still pick me up from school?" she asked. "Of course." "Would my friends still see me?" He shook his head gently. "Not at that school, sweetheart." Hannah leaned against him, resting her head on his arm. "I like my school," she whispered. "I like my teacher and my friends, and the little garden we planted behind the playground." Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her close. As she spoke, clarity bloomed gently within him. His daughter did not need polished hallways or grand buildings to grow. She needed a place where she felt seen, understood, and loved. She needed the comfort of community, the feeling of belonging, the steady guidance of familiar faces. The scholarship promised opportunity, but Hannah already had what mattered most. The next morning, Daniel visited Evelyn's office. She listened quietly as he explained his decision, her expression thoughtful rather than surprised. When he finished, she nodded with calm understanding. "You are choosing what is right for your daughter," she said softly. "That choice is never wrong." He thanked her for offering something so generous, grateful that she understood rather than questioned him. Later that afternoon, when Daniel returned home, he found Hannah sitting at the table drawing a picture of her school garden. She looked up and smiled with a kind of joy that came from knowing she would not have to say goodbye to the places she loved. Daniel stood in the doorway watching her with quiet pride. They were not wealthy. They did not live in a grand home. But together they had built something steady and strong. Enough. And sometimes enough was exactly what a heart needed. Friday evenings at Oak Ridge Diner carried a familiar comfort for Daniel, like slipping into an old coat that still held traces of past warmth. He had kept his promise to himself and to Evelyn, working one shift a week, no matter how busy his new job became. The diner remained a place that grounded him, a reminder of the long nights that shaped his understanding of struggle and kindness. When he pushed through the back door that evening, the scent of coffee and warm biscuits greeted him with the same gentle welcome as always. Tom stood at the grill humming an old tune, his broad shoulders moving steadily as he flipped pancakes. Jenna sat near the counter reading notes for her clinical training. And old friends like Raymond drifted in with their usual stories, carrying the comforting rhythm of a place unchanged by modern haste. Daniel tied his apron and stepped onto the floor, greeting customers with the easy smile he had mastered during the hardest years of his life. Near closing time, a young man entered the diner with weary steps. He wore stained work clothes and carried a fatigue Daniel recognized instantly, the kind that settled into a person who pushed through long days with little rest. The stranger slid onto a stool at the counter and studied the menu as though calculating each item carefully. When Daniel approached, the man ordered a simple cup of coffee, nothing more. Daniel poured the steaming drink and placed it gently before him. "Long day?" he asked. "3," the man replied with a tired chuckle rubbing his eyes. "I work construction during the day, then paint houses at night. Sometimes I help my uncle with weekend jobs too." Daniel nodded with the quiet understanding of someone who had walked that same difficult path. When the man finished his drink and asked for the bill, Daniel handed him a small slip. The total was marked as 0. The man looked up in confusion. "Someone paid it forward for you," Daniel said softly. "Just remember to do the same someday." The stranger blinked, emotion flickering in his eyes. "Thank you. I really needed this." After he left, Daniel cleared the counter with patient hands. As he did, he noticed a familiar presence in the far corner booth. Evelyn sat with a cup of coffee and a slice of peach pie, the soft glow of the overhead light touching her features. She looked comfortable there, as if the diner had become a quiet refuge rather than a novelty. Daniel approached with a smile. "Most executives do not spend their Friday nights in small diners," he teased gently. "Most executives do not know what they are missing," she answered with an easy warmth. She finished her pie and stood placing 2 folded bills on the table. Daniel picked them up and saw that she had left $100 for the staff tip jar. Beneath the bills rested a note folded carefully. He opened it to find a short message written in her elegant script. "You are doing beautifully. Keep going. A. Daniel looked up to thank her, but she was already heading toward the door. She paused only once, turning back with a small smile. "That young man you helped tonight is named Daniel Hayes. He's a gifted painter, putting himself through art school. He has a difficult road ahead, but he will be all right. Someone saw him, just as someone once saw you." Then she stepped outside into the gentle night air. Daniel placed the money in the staff tip jar where it would be shared among everyone the next day. But he kept the note close, sliding it into the pocket of his apron like a small treasure. The diner lights reflected softly on the windows as he locked the door and stepped out into the cool evening. The rain from earlier in the week had passed, leaving the streets clear and quiet. As he walked toward his car, his phone buzzed with a message from Hannah. "Love you, Daddy. See you in the morning." Daniel smiled, his heart warm with gratitude. He texted back, "Love you too, sweetheart." He stood there a moment, breathing in the steady peace of the night. Some people measured blessings in dollars or status. But Daniel had learned that the richest gifts often arrived as simple moments of kindness. A note left beneath a plate. A chance offered to a stranger. A child sleeping safely in her bed. A shift at a small diner that reminded him of where he came from and who he wanted to remain. Kindness was a river passing from one heart to another, carried by hands that never knew where its journey might lead. It had moved from Evelyn's mother, to a construction worker from that worker, to Evelyn herself from her, to Daniel, and from Daniel to dozens of families across the city. And now it flowed onward, touching a young painter who walked into a diner, tired and uncertain. Daniel unlocked his car, holding the note in his hand one last time before slipping it safely into his pocket. Life would continue with its trials and triumphs, but he knew something for certain. Enough was no longer a distant dream. Enough was here, steady and real, shaped by compassion and courage. As he drove home, the city lights reflected softly in the rearview mirror, guiding him toward a tomorrow filled with purpose. And to everyone listening to this story, may you carry its message in your heart. If it touched you, share your thoughts below. Offer a moment of kindness to someone near you, and remember to like and subscribe for more stories that warm the soul and light the way forward.